It's the dream of a lot of designers to design a game for their favorite intellectual property or franchise. But what is it like actually working on such a game and pitching it to a publisher hoping it gets chosen? How do you even get the chance to pitch for such a game? In this video I want to talk about one of my first experiences doing just that, which ended up with me designing a Minecraft game. Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time board game designer based in Australia, and to date I've had over 60 games published all around the world in many different languages. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, my experiences as a full-time game designer in the industry, and tips and tricks that can help you in your own game designing. So this video is going to be a bit different. I'm just going to be going over what it was like to design a Minecraft card game. So where do we start? How did I actually even get the chance to try and work on a game like this? Ravensburger was the initial publisher of the game Minecraft Builders and Biomes, which was very successful to them, and it was a larger board game based on the Minecraft universe. In 2021 I got an email from them asking me to pitch ideas for a Minecraft card game. Ravensburger will do this from time to time. They have a certain group of designers that they'll ask for pitches if they've got a particular IP that they need a game for. I think this was the third or fourth time that I'd submitted a pitch for them, and it's the first time it was actually successful. You might ask how you actually get on one of these lists. I had been pitching to Ravensburger at Essen and other fairs for many years, and they'd got to know me by this point, and prior to this I had signed one game to them, the Echoes game series, so they had a bit of an idea of what I was like as a game designer and that I could deliver if asked. As I understand it, they asked a small group of designers, somewhere between 5 and 10 designers, to submit pitches, ideas, for a particular brief. And then they'll select the best 3 or 4 to ask for a full prototype, and then it'll get tested and they'll make a final decision. I've never made it past this initial pitch stage. So as I said, it started with an email near the end of 2021. And in a way it came at a good time. It was the middle of the pandemic and I sort of had time to myself to work on some extra projects. And when I got the email I was really excited to work on something. But there was one problem. I'd never actually played Minecraft. Of course I knew about the game, but if I was going to design something that would do the game justice, I'd probably better play it to get some idea of what really makes it tick, what's enjoyable, what do players see in it. But I didn't have much time. They wanted our proposals within 1 month by the end of January in 2023. So I used the first 2 weeks of that month to download and play Minecraft a bunch for the first time. Yeah, it's a tough life being a game designer, I guess. I had a lot of fun. I have to admit, I played the game in survival mode and found it simultaneously quite exciting, exploring everything, finding new biomes and all the different animals and creep and resources that you could find there. I would love that feeling when you sort of cross a new horizon, where you reach the crest of a mountain or the bottom of a cave and suddenly the world sort of opens up again and you see all these interesting things that your eye is drawn to that you want to explore and discover. But equally I found survival mode a bit frustrating, especially every time I would die. I fell off cliffs a lot. That was my preferred mode of death. Well, preferred maybe isn't the right way to put it. It was probably after the third time of trying to trudge back to where my corpse had landed. Sometimes it fell off a cliff, so it was even harder to find my stuff again, that I sort of gave up and really didn't touch it anymore. But by that point, I think I had got a good handle on the game and really what makes it tick and why it is so engaging. I could definitely see why it is so popular, even if it was a bit frustrating for me. I know creative mode sort of takes away with a lot of frustration, and maybe I would have enjoyed that. I personally like a little bit of tension, a little bit of game in it. But from that I had a bunch of ideas that I'd be able to work on to come up with a pitch for Ravensburger. So I have 2 weeks to go and I need to deliver a pitch. A pitch in this case is really just a 1 or 2 page PDF document outlining your idea. Mainly it's text, but you can put a few images in there if you have like a mock-up of a card or a component that might support what your pitch is. Really you're giving an overview of what the game is. So you really want to hit the main details, how many players it is it competitive or cooperative, maybe what type of mechanisms are in the game, certainly what type of components there would be, and then you go into a rough outline of how the game plays. It doesn't have to be too detailed, really you just need to give enough information so that the people that you're giving to can imagine what the game might play like. Thankfully in this process Ravensburger don't require you to submit a prototype at the first stage, and so it cuts down on the amount of work you have to do when you don't really know whether they're going to like your idea or not. You don't want to sink a whole bunch of time working on a game, prototyping it, playtesting it, just to find out that they don't like it and you've effectively wasted that time. The other nice thing about designing for a brief like this is often you have really great constraints that help guide what you're going to try and design or pitch. In this particular instance, there was one really key part. It had to be a card game and it had to be only cards. That was the only component you could use. About up to 110 or 120 cards, enough that was going to fit in a small box like this. They also wanted it to be a family-style game that would be playable by children 8 and up, and hopefully with their parents as well, so it had to be a fairly straightforward, easy-to-play kind of experience. A few other things about the kind of constraints: they wanted to be different enough from the bigger Minecraft Builders and Biomes game, which focused a lot on crafting, so that was probably not a type of theme that they wanted to be encapsulated in the game. They're also quite clear that the game doesn't have to cover the whole Minecraft experience. In fact, focusing on one aspect probably was going to be the best way to go. And in the brief, they also suggested some particular themes that they thought might work well, but they weren't prescriptive about whether you had to use those themes or not. Some things focused on the player's journey, so things like exploration and discovery. Some were about overcoming challenges, such as you being versus the environment or creeps. And also the idea of working with the land, farming, mining, taking care of animals, this kind of thing. These were themes that weren't really explored in the bigger Minecraft game and could be suitable in a small card game. And while I just said that having constraints can be really useful, I actually found this particular pitch experience quite difficult, actually. This was maybe typified by the fact that I actually just chose to submit 2 different pitches at the end of the day. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. It's not necessarily a lot of extra work, it's another 2-page document. And I think the 2 ideas were very different, and I couldn't really decide which one would be the best one, so I put both in. And so I can show you those pitch documents here so you can get a bit of idea. You'll note very quickly I'm not much of a graphic designer, but I try to make things as clear as possible. So my first pitch was called Minecraft Mine Mania, and it was a push your luck style game about delving into the mines, hoping to find diamonds and other treasures while avoiding monsters, or falling into lava, which is a very classic experience that I experienced when I was playing the game, that I would keep mining and then realize, oh, I hit lava and just would probably die. In the game, players would delve into the mines one at a time, and they would start by adventuring, which would mean drawing cards from a mine deck that would contain both treasures, the things you wanted, and creeps, which you didn't want. The second part of your turn is purchasing equipment, which would make you more powerful for future turns. And the goal of the game was to be the first player to buy 4 pieces of equipment. And really the main things is I'm making sure that I show what all the components are, overview of the setup, and actually this is really a full rules document. Not all pitches are like that. In a more complicated game you wouldn't fit the rules on 2 pages. But because this was a fairly simple card game and it was so constrained in terms of what the game could be, I actually felt the easiest way was essentially writing a rules document. So this first idea came to me fairly quickly, and it was actually one of the themes they suggested in the initial briefing document. I was a little worried that it came a bit too easily. I find when game design ideas are too easy or they come together too quickly, I worry that you're not really putting the work in or exploring what the games truly could be. You're just sort of taking the easy answers and accepting them or just being happy with them and not really working hard to really find the best answer or the best version of the game. So that was one reason I was a little bit worried about it. And I was also a little bit worried that a lot of other people would pitch probably with a similar theme, so it wouldn't really stand out. The mechanisms were kind of interesting. They were certainly very clear and very good for a family audience, but I wouldn't say they were particularly innovative. There wasn't really a very strong hook. I think I probably had this pitch finished with about 1 week to go. But at the same time, I had this other idea, which I called Minecraft the Explorers. This idea was really stuck in my head. I can really clearly remember almost dreaming about it for several nights. I think I was quite, not exactly stressed, but I was a little bit worried because I really had a strict deadline. You don't tend to have a very strict deadline in game design to come up with a particular idea or finalize what it should be. So it's a somewhat strange experience. But yeah, my mind was so obsessed with it and it was turning it over in my head all the time. So I know my subconscious was putting a lot of work in. One of the reasons why is it wasn't an obvious idea. I think it wasn't something that had necessarily been done before. When I had the idea, it was driven so much by the feeling I had in the game when I was playing the computer game. And that was the feeling of exploring and seeing new lands and discovering what was in them. But because the idea was born from that feeling, rather than a mechanical point, the mind game was definitely mechanical first, it's a lot harder then to choose what the mechanisms can be because you haven't got as strong a guide. And so it took me a long time to find something that would work, while at the same time being simple enough for a family card game. And in the end, I came up with this idea essentially for a cooperative game where players would work together, explore different biomes and different environments in the game. As they explored them, the front of the card would show the biome or what you're actually exploring, and the back would be whatever you would find from it. And of course there'd be multiple copies of the same biome, so you wouldn't quite know what you're going to get. So there's a bit of luck, a little bit of push your luck. But the idea is then once you have these resources, You would either be using them, they could be used to help you explore other things, or ultimately you would have to collect certain resources and hand them in to fulfill certain goals. And once you had fulfilled a certain number of goals, you would win. The cooperative part of the game would be that you could share items amongst each other, and that there was a timer on the game. Basically, at the end of every turn, you would reveal a new mob from the deck, and once that deck of mobs ran out, then the game would be over. And there was a nice part where when you reveal a mob, it stays in the play area, and if you don't deal with it, if you don't fight with it and discard it, then it actually means there's a chance you'll go through the mob deck even quicker, hastening the end of the game. Here you can see what I was meaning with the front of the card here. It would be like a sunken ship here. This would be some cost in hunger, so the idea of the game is you would have a certain amount of hunger that you would use on your turn. These are effectively action points, and you'd spend them to explore cards. When you explore a card, you flip it over and you would get whatever's on the back. So here I got a diamond from the sunken ship, or this dungeon, I could spend 4 food, and on the other side I'd find an iron sword. As you can see, the iron sword would mean that fighting actions with a sword would cost 1 less food. And all the actions would have a particular type. The sunken ship was a swimming action, the dungeon was a mining action. So there was a sense, a little bit of engine building or getting kitted out in order to become better and better at exploring and be able to do more and more on your turn. I also really liked encountering villagers in the game, so I really tried to make sure that that was a part of this game as well. And the idea of villagers, they were similar to the other cards in which you would interact with them, flip them over and get whatever they gave you. But with villagers, you always knew what you got, and it was a set trade. You had to give them a certain number of items, they would trade with you and give you what they had. But as you can see, again, just a 2-page rule document. I didn't go into too much detail, and I certainly hadn't designed the whole game at this point. I just had the framework of how the game could function, and also some ideas of different types of cards you could include. So after a rather long week of not a lot of sleep, I managed to get the 2 proposals in on time, and at this point it was about the end of January 2022. And after I submitted these proposals, all I could do was wait. Then Ravensburger would look over the different pitches, and they would choose some number, I think between 3 and 5, where they would go back to the authors and then request them to make a prototype to send to them. And they gave us about 3 months to do that. I got the feedback on the ideas within a couple of weeks, and thankfully they really liked the Minecraft Explorers idea and invited me to submit that as a prototype for further consideration. And the mine idea, they didn't like as much, and it matched my feelings about the game. It was a little too obvious and potentially not particularly mechanically interesting. There's definitely something to take away from that sometimes the best ideas really bug you and they take a lot of effort to get out, because they aren't things you've seen before necessarily, so it takes a lot more work and a lot more effort and thinking to put them together. In the future, if I'm ever pitching for these things, if I have to try and decide between 2 different ideas, I think something like that will help guide me. If it feels difficult, it's probably the right idea. Especially in this type of process where you don't have to solve all the problems to pitch it. You could just pitch it and then solve the problems later. So it was about mid-February, and I had until the end of April 2022 to submit a prototype. So that was about 10 weeks, which is quite a tight deadline, but thankfully, because the game was so constrained, I knew it could only be cards. I had a rule document already, so I knew how the game had to work. The challenge was then just enumerating about 110 different cards, different biomes and items that could work together and kind of be interesting. But thankfully this wasn't as difficult a job it might have been. Minecraft is a particularly good IP if you have to come up with lots of different items and resources. I certainly spent many hours going through the Minecraft wiki, looking at all the different resources and biomes and where you could find things. I did a lot of work to make sure that where you would find certain things had to be in the right biome. There's so much data and so much richness to what is in Minecraft that the process was actually quite fun. There was certainly more than enough that I could include in the game without kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. And I actually ended up submitting my prototype early, in mid-April rather than the end of April. It went that well. And here I'll give you a look of the prototype that I submitted. Again, you'll see the kind of lo-fi graphic design that I tend to approach these games with. For me, the main thing is that the components have to be clear. You have to be able to read the cards clearly. But apart from that, I don't worry about artwork or very intricate graphic design or anything like that. And hopefully, in the future in the channel, I'll talk about a little bit how I make my prototypes. So I submitted that along with an updated rules document to Ravensburger. And as I said, that was about the end of April. And then basically I waited. As is a very normal thing of being a game designer, it's often a waiting game. And in this particular instance, not only was I waiting for Ravensburg to make a final decision, I think they were down to the top 3 games at this point, and I was one of those 3. But they also had to liaise with Mojang, the developer of Minecraft, who would have to approve whatever game they chose. And in the end, I had to wait a whole year for them to make a final decision, which was that they wanted to publish my game. And of course this was amazing, but it was a very long time to wait. This is very normal when dealing with licensed games. The licensor who owns the property needs to protect it. They need to protect how it's going to be represented in that other game. They want to make sure it matches with how they want their intellectual property to appear out in the world, and that it matches with their other products and other instances of the IP. And these businesses all work on different timescales. So sometimes these things just take longer because you need all the dominoes to line up, all the approvals, all the people to be on the same page and tick off at the same time for the project to actually get the green light and go ahead. And in some ways, when I got the final decision, I'd almost forgotten that I had made the game. It was so long ago. But it was a very pleasant surprise when I finally got that email saying, yes, we're going to do it and we want to do your game. In this year process, there was a lot of development and back and forth with Ravensburger, further developing and tweaking the idea. They did a lot of playtesting with their different groups and with people who like Minecraft, and they suggested a lot of different tweaks and changes, some simplifications to the system. I'm not going to go over how the game works in this video, but over at the Dicia review, they've made a great overview of how the game plays, and I'll link that video up here. So feel free to go there and watch how the game plays, and as you saw in the video of the game, there are some changes as to the prototype I showed you, but there weren't that many changes, and I would say it was actually a fairly smooth development process with Ravensburger in the end. Once I'd had that decision in April 2023 that yes, they were going to do the game, then at that point my work was pretty much done. There's still a lot of checking of different components, and at different points I would get sent files, say of the cards or the rules, for me to look over and give my thoughts or edits. But the game at this point was fairly settled, and really the main work was developing the artwork and graphic design that would go into the final product. And once May of 2024 rolled around, I got this in my hand, and I'm really happy. For this video I was actually going back over the old pitch documents, and they had some mock-ups of the boxes, what the game could look like, and in the end this actually looks pretty close to one of the mock-ups, which is interesting. And so far it's had some really good feedback. Players have really enjoyed it, they've really enjoyed the connection to Minecraft, which I've been so happy to hear. I also got my first royalty report earlier this year, so about a month ago, and I'll be sharing that in a future video on my finances, but suffice to say it's been selling pretty well, and it certainly helped me quite a bit financially as a full-time game designer. So it's a bit of a different video this week. I hope it was interesting for you to kind of hear a bit about what the process is like to design an official licensed game, to pitch for that and then work on it with the publisher to help fit a very defined vision from the very start. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And also feel free to suggest any other topics or videos that you'd like me to make. I definitely try and listen to the feedback and try and make videos that match what you want to hear about. But until next time, all the best with your designing, and I'll see you later. Bye.